Thank you very much for coming to the Filmmaker Panel discussion. We always feel like this is really a special part of the event, and I'll talk a little louder. So thank you for coming to this, and it is our 13th annual film festival, and we're very excited to have the panel of judges with us today. It's just great that you are all able to make it. Thank you very much. So I'm Holly Dewar, and I am the chair of the Belleville Downtown DocFest Committee. And with me today is also Jody Cooper, who's the film festival coordinator. Very hardworking. And, yes, it's been busy. And of course, we have a filmmaker panel, and I'm going to introduce them in just one moment. So whether or not you're a documentary or a filmmaker or a fan of the genre, the Filmmaker Panel discussion provides an opportunity to hear firsthand stories and insights from 4 distinguished filmmakers about their craft, their career, and the changing landscape of documentary film. Just before I introduce the panel, I want to express our sincere thanks to Janet Jarrell, the Executive Director of the Quinte Arts Council, for the support, and the Quinte Arts Council sponsored this event. So I really appreciate that help. And I also want to take a moment to acknowledge First Peoples and traditional territory. Belleville Downtown DocFest is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee, and we acknowledge that they've been here and continue to be present on this territory since time immemorial. And we're very grateful to have the opportunity to work and to present the film festival in this community on the territory. We also are proud to present documentaries by Indigenous filmmakers. I think if you look through the program, you'll see that we do have a number of really amazing films by Indigenous filmmakers. And I want to just mention that tomorrow night, Saturday night, we are showing Water Walker, which is a fabulous short film, and also Boil Alert. And that's happening at 8 p.m. at the Empire Theatre. And we're really pleased that First Nations Technical Institute sponsored those 2 screenings. So I just want to say thank you to them. Okay, I'll do the introductions now. So, and Jody's going to help me with this. So first off, I'm going to introduce Therese Shechter. And Therese is an award-winning filmmaker, a writer, and an artist, and the founder of the production company Trixie Films. Therese began her 2-decade-long filmmaking career at Robert De Niro's production company in Tribeca Film. Her work fuses humor, activism, and personal storytelling to examine and confront society's most sacred ideas about womanhood. Her most recent film, My So-Called Selfish Life, was released in 2022 to critical acclaim, and it challenges one of our greatest social taboos, that of choosing not to become a mother. Her film is scheduled to run Saturday, February 24th, tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. at the Empire Theatre. Yay!
I have to get really good at sharing. It's only one of my
And a lot of breakable.
And a lot of breakable stuff there. Yeah, perfect. It's a recipe for good things, right? Awesome. Hi, I'm Jody Cooper. Holly introduced me earlier, and I have the privilege of introducing Chrisann Hessing, who's with us today. And Chrisann is a documentary filmmaker and impact producer based in Toronto. She's produced award-winning short films that have screened at Hot Docs, RIDM, Montreal Documentary Film Festival, Global Impact Film Festival, and the London Asian Film Festival. She's passionate about using visual storytelling as a tool to educate, raise awareness, and inspire positive change. Chrisann's short film, Turning Tables, won Best Short Documentary at the American Indian Film Festival and has screened in over 30 film festivals internationally. It was edited, the film this weekend, or was both of them edited by Ryan North? They were both edited by Ryan North. Oh, sweet. It was edited by local filmmaker, editor, and producer Ryan North of Fifth Town Films. And then her debut feature, which is what we have in the festival this weekend, We Will Be Brave, premiered at the Calgary International Film Festival and won Audience Choice Feature Film at the Toronto Real Asian International Film Festival in 2023. We Will Be Brave is showing Sunday, February 25th at 2:30 p.m. at the Pinnacle Playhouse. Welcome. And then while I have the mic, I also have the privilege of introducing Roz Mugford. Roz is the CEO and creative director of Double Barrel Studios, Inc. She has over 20 years of expertise in digital film, documentary, and video production. Since 2012, she's been instrumental in crafting and producing a wide range of content, including engaging brand narratives and impactful documentaries. Roz's versatility shines through her work, her career encompassing writing, producing, directing, and hosting diverse content across various platforms, from print magazines to radio, television, and online media. Hidden Heroes is Roz's short, showing Saturday, February 24th at 10 a.m. at the Pinnacle Playhouse.
I love this dynamic duo.
Wireless, they do it self-button.
And it's my great pleasure to introduce Victor Cooper. Victor has been creating high-quality broadcast and web content for over 13 years, and he's worked in every part of production, right from script to screening. With a strong focus on directing, Victor has worked on locations around the world, places like Panama, Germany, Spain, the Bahamas, and Mexico. I'm very envious. He is half of the creative team behind the short psychological slasher film Mercy, which many of you have seen. He and his partner formed 80/20 Studio, located in Belleville, and DocFest has screened a number of Victor's short films. And The Loft on St. Paul's was screened in 2020, and Full was screened last year. The Full Recipe for Happiness, which is a great film, love that one. And also, he prides himself on being able to find and develop great stories, and by making strong connections with cast and crew. And he's hugely helpful for DocFest, and I really want to thank you so much, Victor, for all of your help and support. Victor's film this year is The Local, and it's a really terrific film. It's showing Saturday, February 24th at 5:30 p.m. at the Pinnacle Playhouse Theater. All right. And since I have the mic, I'm going to give the first question. So this one, yeah, it's really great to have an opportunity to talk about your films, filmmaking, and documentaries. And this question, I'm going to have each of you answer. So I'll start off with Roz. So you have extensive experience in the film industry. Where do you think that documentary films where do you see them going in the next 2 to 3 years? And what are you seeing in terms of shifts in the field?
Yes, well, that's a tough one. I think I got the hardest question right out of the gate. I mean, for me personally, like, this is my first documentary film. I've been working in brand content and television and radio and all of that for a number of years. So I don't have a huge perspective on the field in terms of like where it's been and where it's going. But what I do know is that what I've discovered after producing Hidden Heroes and looking at the landscape in Canada and distributors is that, you know, the distribution landscape and the way that people actually get their documentaries out there is changing so drastically because the funding is not available. You know, documentaries are not being bought up the way they were anymore. Film festivals are no longer the, you know, sure thing for a really hot documentary film to go and get distribution. Lots of documentary films now go to festivals, don't get distribution at all. So I think, you know, docs right now are in a place where it's really difficult. It's really difficult to get your film in front of audiences, maybe even more so than ever. Especially as the streamers are now not buying up as much documentary content either. So I think, you know, I'm following this guy online who's produced a lot of docs in the States. He has a company called Show and Tell. Oh. And basically, yeah, okay, awesome, nice, okay. We're all on the same page. And so he basically teaches filmmakers how to self-distribute and how to get your content out there by yourself, how to actually, for example, for me, like Hidden Heroes is a very niche film. It's about military history in Canada. So, you know, since there's no broadcasters for this type of content in Canada, you know, how do I get it in front of those audiences? So he teaches you how to find your niche audiences and really deliver your content directly to them and keep more of that money in your pocket as a documentary filmmaker, because, you know, distributors take a big chunk and all the streamers take a big chunk. And so by the time, you know, it gets out there, you're left with nothing or little to nothing as the filmmaker. So this is kind of the new model, I think, is self-distribution and figuring out how to target your own audiences and get your content in front of them in really new and creative ways. So in some ways it's really hard, and in other ways it's really exciting, you know, because the world's kind of your oyster if you want to do it yourself, you know.
Positive outlook.
Yeah, that's me, glass half full.
Well, I agree with everything you just said. I do think that it has become harder and harder to fund documentaries and to distribute documentaries. And it was hard to begin with. I've been doing this for like 24 years now, and it gets harder every year. Budgets are smaller. The pandemic really hit hard in a lot of sectors, especially like educational distribution. You know, going to colleges, going to conferences, that kind of stuff, which used to be one of the rare ways that we might make some money. You know, and the budgets of a lot of universities and colleges have been cut because their enrollment has been cut, and on and on. But I'm really glad you mentioned Show and Tell, because I used Show and Tell. Okay, so I'm gonna just back up for a sec. So I've always worked with distributors. They take a chunk. Sometimes they work really hard for you and you're happy to give it to them. Sometimes they don't. And you kind of a little bit lose control of your film. So I decided not to do that. So I didn't sign with a conventional distributor. And and then I just decided, I'm just gonna do a digital premiere of this film, working with Show and Tell, which gives you a platform. And so I just decided to do that, which I've never really been able to do before. Just say, I'm gonna try this, let's see if it works. And we ran the film for 2.5 weeks, and it was like wildly popular. Wildly popular. It went to 35 countries, you know, on just that little platform, and you know, we made money, and so that was a real eye-opener for me, actually. And this is all leading to me saying, I think that finding your audience, your specific audience, is the strongest tool that we have, because you can take it right to your audience. They're not like all these gatekeepers between you. So I think the more niche films are actually might be more successful down the road, just because of that. But you know, it's so much work. So that's the other part of it. You're willing to put in the work. That's right.
I totally agree with everything you guys are saying. I mean, the landscape right now, from a funding perspective, is a little rocky. So alternative methods are really what we're almost forced into looking at. But based on top of what you said, is this idea of finding your audience. And what I also work as an impact producer, which means I work with filmmakers whose films are already completed, and I look at different kind of audiences that we can reach, who would be interested, and also ones that wouldn't be interested but should see the film. And so what I'm finding in that process of working with other filmmakers, I've almost built this network now of a really diverse array of unlikely venues and screening partners, which can range from classrooms to corporate boardrooms, to like farmers' councils to prisons, and all these different kinds of venues, and almost curating the work to these spaces and the audiences that lie there. So in a way, what I've learned in the last few years, and with the rise of, you know, more social justice oriented films and films that are more niche, is this idea of having your built-in audience first and almost making a film around that. And because you know that there's an audience already looking to see more information about this particular topic and things like that. And so, you know, I've seen some interesting, you know, grant opportunities and alternate ways of funding films. I actually want to shout out 3 other films that are at the festival this year that I worked as an impact producer for. They're all part of Hot Doc's Citizen Minute series, which is a short doc collection that highlights Canadians all across the country who are doing things to make their communities better places. And so the 3 films are Ancestral Threads, Janelle Niles and Convenient, and Sisterhood Softball. And so those 3 films and filmmakers did exactly what I was saying about the built-in audience. The films and the change makers that they made films about were people they already knew and were in their neighborhoods, in their circles. And then they submitted these ideas for funding through Hot Docs, and then they got to make these films. And as a result of that, Hot Docs had this built-in audience of, you know, people who know the festival and stuff. And so we were able to like screen the film to people who are waiting for films like this. So, I mean, yeah, like kind of also talking glass half full, because the other side of it is it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of capacity to just even think about, you know, making the film is one thing, and then to think about what you're gonna do after that. It's definitely a conversation that requires multiple checkpoints. But yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what's being said. I think it is refreshing to hear you say, like, find something where there's a built-in audience, because I think there is a bit of an attitude in some filmmaking where it's just like, audience comes last. You make what you're gonna make, and if you're true to yourself, there'll be an audience. And it's like, okay, but you know, you also put a lot of time and money into this, you wanna make sure people see it. So it's nice to hear that people saying that they wanna make sure people see their films. It's not just me. I do think the one thing I've seen that's changing, and I saw it more so when I was working in television, a lot of documentaries now are basically branded documentaries, and there's really good versions of that, and there's really terrible versions of that, obviously. Yeti is, I think, maybe one of the best versions of that, Yeti coolers. They put so much money into making branded documentaries. And when I say branded, I mean, there might be one person wearing a Yeti hat in the whole thing, or someone pulls something out of a Yeti cooler at some point. The rest of it is 100% the filmmaker's story. And they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to make these beautiful 15 to 20 minute documentaries that are like incredibly heartfelt, gut-wrenching stories. And they seem very unadulterated by Yeti, you know? So, yeah, you might have to have somebody throw on a Yeti hat, but does it mean that you get to tell the story the way that you really want it to? Possibly. So that, I think that's one way that things are changing, and I think a lot of companies are leaning towards that versus the welcome to, you know, this infomercial about Yeti. I don't know that way. We haven't done that voice in a long time. You got it. Well, this worked out great.
That's the next question. Awesome. Thank you all for those answers. That was really interesting to hear, like, the similarities and then the differences and the perspectives as well. My next question is for Therese. We love the way you use humor while unpacking some of the largely challenging, but yet unchallenged, right, assumptions about women and women's lives. So I'm just wondering a little bit about your decision to use humor in that way, and how you came to that, and why you decided to do it in that way.
Yeah, thanks for that question. All my films are really looking at some prickly aspect of our expectations on women and their lives and destinies. And this is stuff that is sometimes really taboo, that makes people really uncomfortable. It challenges a lot of status quo that, you know, is so prevalent we just don't even notice it. I've made films about choosing not to become a mother, but the larger idea of reproductive freedom, that to control your own body. I didn't realize how controversial this film was going to be. And every time I go into a film, I'm like, why is this so controversial? So the humor is a way in, I think. I think it's a way in. It's a way to provide something entertaining, although very serious, but also very entertaining at the same time, and keep people engaged through the humor, so they stay in the conversation. They don't sort of do that, because I've been to many parties when I have said, oh, I'm making a film about women who don't want children, and I get just a blank stare back at me. They're like, okay then. and so I think that the humorous aspects really help with that, and we do that through very engaging subjects, but also animation, lots of pop culture, things like that. So that's the thinking around it. But I have to say that everything I've ever done has had humor in it. So in a way, it kind of suited my own way of expressing ideas. So it's been a good marriage. I hope you all think it's entertaining if you go see it. I think it's
Actually, that way, how they connect next time. This is the big reach.
Okay. We should get to the point where we can just.
We can blow it. I think we can blow it. Yeah. All right. I play baseball. Okay. So this one's for you, Roz. What was the experience of telling the personal stories of individuals who serve behind the scenes in the armed forces? Was that a new world for you, or were you already familiar with that kind of life and what was involved? Was it a surprise or something you already?
I knew nothing about the military actually going into this documentary. I actually had the Department of National Defense approach me, and so there was his name is Gordon Bennett, and he was the head of logistics in Borden, CFB Borden, which is where all the logistics soldiers go to be trained. And he was just really passionate about the story, and I kind of wish he could be here because he was really the one that spearheaded this, but he started to tell me the stories about these logistics people who are essentially the people behind the scenes in the military. So they'll say the folks who aren't at the sharp end of the spear is how they describe it. So it could be, the women who flew planes to the front lines in World War II. It could be the people who delivered ammunition to the front lines in World War I by horse, It's also could be cooks, right? It could be truck drivers in Afghanistan. These are the stories we actually tell in the film. So I knew nothing about these folks going in, and actually the process of trying to tell the stories was really difficult because these folks have never had their history told. In a lot of cases, it doesn't exist. So to actually try to track down the stories of people who worked behind the scenes in the military in World War I, a lot of the times those were our indigenous soldiers, those were our Chinese labor corps, that was the number 2 labor battalion, who was our only Black battalion in Canada's history. Oftentimes these were the folks who were the logistics soldiers, digging ditches, doing trenches, putting down tracks. And their stories were not recorded in a lot of cases. And so it was really hard to find, actually. We spent about 3 months doing research, trying to find stories. And we're able to dig up a story of a horse transport driver from World War I who had written a memoir. And it's actually the only memoir that I know of a horse transport driver in World War I. But these people were often in harm's way, and that's what the documentary talks about. They were always, delivering to the front lines. And so the stories we tell in the doc are the really dramatic stories where their lives are in danger, especially the women in World War II who flew planes to the front, and often were flying planes that they'd never flown and only had a blue book to look at to go, what's this plane about? And so many people don't know those stories of these amazing women who were so incredibly brave, and a number of them died, right? So yeah, it was a tough story to tell, and we had to dig really deep to find the stories, but we did. And I have a lot of people asking me now, is there gonna be hidden heroes too? When are you gonna, and I'm like, I would love to do it, and again, talking about niche audiences, that's something that I'm thinking about and considering for the future. So yeah.
Thank you, Roz.
Yeah, you bet.
Jody.
Oh yeah, I should pass it the other one.
Thanks, Holly. So this question is for Chrisann. Just wondering a little bit, so there's a really strong theme around sharing healthy masculinity through the arts, photography, beatboxing, poetry, martial arts. And I just wanted to hear a little bit on your own thoughts around using the arts and healing and how that goes together.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think for any and all artists in the room, we all know how the healing effect of being able to express yourself through your art, whatever art form that is. And I think, you know, and as a filmmaker, I've experienced that time and again through my own work. And I tend to use the subjects and the topics that I pursue in my documentary films as a way to learn more, not just about myself, but about the things that I had no knowledge of before. It's my way into in a certain world. And in the case of working with the Good Guys, which is the group that my film is about, I was very intrigued that they were, you know, my way in was the fact that they were using different forms of art as a way to express and heal. But the part that I obviously didn't know much about was what is that like for a racialized man? And a racialized man that's living on the margins in a city like Toronto with not a lot of opportunities, but yet their whole life in front of them. And so what that really led me into was this understanding that I was overwhelmed by, that men are just not given spaces to express themselves in a safe way, in a way that is acceptable or encouraged at all. And so, and among men, not only in my life, but in community, especially with men of color, these conversations about how you're feeling or how or what's happening to you at the time, it's just not something you talk about. So the art therapy that they use, which ranged from beatboxing to painting, spoken word, poetry, photography. It was wild, the different kinds of artists that they were able to bring together and express themselves through these different art forms. And so each of the guys in the film, of the core member of the group, they all have their respective art form, and so that's what I spent time. I wanted to, in making this film, I was like, similar to you, it's like when I walk in a room and I tell people I'm making a film about healthy masculinity, they're like, toxic masculinity? Healthy? Like, what's that? And so it was really about, okay, what is our way in? And our way in was through art, because everyone can understand what that impact is, right? And to have seen that unfold over time with each of the guys we filmed with, and to have them so graciously share their own stories of healing through that, it was beautiful. It was beautiful and very validating as a filmmaker myself. There was solidarity and obviously just the process of making art together. And yeah, it was a great process.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll get this back to Holly. I just wanted to also mention, paired with your film this year, we have a local short called Brushes of Hope, which also looks at the impact of art on people's lives. So that'll be a really nice pairing this weekend.
I'm thinking like wireless mic.
Yeah. I think one of these opportunity as well.
If anybody wants to get us a gift.
For people to have a chance to ask questions too. And so maybe we'll just take a question from the audience. If there's anybody who's got a burning question and wants to have a chance to bring that forward. And if not, I'll move on to my next question. Anybody who's wanting to? Okay, all right. I'm gonna lob this one over at you, Victor.
Sure.
So with your film, you know, it's a short film, and I really thought that that there's such a story arc there. And I wanted to ask you just about the challenges in making a film like that, a short film, but having that kind of story where it's really got, you know, it comes to, there's just a real arc there, and then it's so beautiful as well. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the challenges in making that film.
Sure. And if you want, I can just, my voice is loud if you want. Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one because although it did take us 3 years to make, it's 14 minutes long, and it's not that heavy-hitting documentary that some are. I mean, the tagline is a lawyer, a realtor, and an NHL player by a bar. Right? So it's goofy, it's lighthearted, and I think that's one thing that I've really enjoyed about DocFest is it's a chance for me, especially just being so close here, I can just say, well, okay, I don't want to make anything really huge or really, although, like I said, it took 3 years to make, but that was for unforeseen circumstances. It just gives me a chance to kind of make something that looks like it would be fun and people would enjoy watching, but is still documentary. As far as the challenges, I mean, they were all just physical challenges. So, I mean, as soon as we started, COVID hit. And that was really kind of the crux of the story. So we couldn't stop. Like as soon as it hit, we said, oh, well, there's our story. So we had to find ways to, still have board meetings on Zoom and film those board meetings and things like that. I do think there's a longer cut that has to happen eventually because there's hours and hours of footage that we didn't use. I would say probably the largest challenge, and I think I'm okay saying this, was the trip to Chicago. All the owners, there's 12 owners to this bar, they all decided, let's go to Chicago and find out what real, great bars and restaurants are like. And we'll make this, and they invited me and, they paid my way, I'm very grateful. And they said, film the whole thing. And I don't think there was 10 seconds I could point a camera at confidently and say, yeah, we can show this to other people. I mean, it was we didn't get one thing done, but we had a great time in Chicago. We saw a ball game, but the camera didn't get much of a workout. So I think that was the biggest challenge, was just having 12 owners all get on the same page and say, okay, let's all go do this for a second so we can film it. And let's do it, sober, and but it was a blast. I can't complain.
One of the things that I'll just comment on the film is just there's a beautiful scene where people are dancing on the patio, and it's absolutely gorgeous, and it's downtown in Belleville, and it just warms your heart. It's like that celebration where you see that all that work and the challenges of trying to create a restaurant like that. And then having COVID hit and and overcoming. It's just very beautiful. And I thought that was, it was really lovely to see that. And thank you.
Yeah, I think we really wanted to make something that was just fun. And again, if I'm being honest, it's a bit of a promo as well. I mean, it doesn't hurt the bar's, business to have a bit of a doc behind it, although the first half doesn't help their image because they bought it in very rough shape. But obviously it all wraps up nicely in the end and feels very warm and fuzzy.
Thanks, Victor. Well, I'm going to ask a question for everyone, because this is also a great way to get back to holiday. But I'm really interested, as Victor said, the documentary filmmaking takes so much time. And so there's so many stories that don't make it into the final piece. And I was just wondering if there was a story or something that you wanted to share that you really loved but just couldn't make it into the final version.
Oh boy. I mean, I think for ours it was just a lot of little things. There wasn't one powerhouse story that we said, oh shoot, I wish we could fit that in there. Because I think we would have. It was just all the little moments because we followed them for 3 years, right? So it's there's bound to be a bunch of stuff that you can't. It's not hoop dreams, and so we, there was just a lot of stuff that we couldn't put in there, and it was just little moments, you know, a little, a great line from somebody, or a little smile from somebody, or even just like you said in that patio scene, that could have been 15 minutes long, because people were just having the time of their lives for 3 hours straight, and everywhere you turned the camera, there was an old couple, you know, kissing in the corner, or there was, you know, somebody up dancing, and, you know, it was just everywhere you looked, it was lovely. So, I mean, you could, yeah, you can't have it all, but I think that's part of the fun too, as much as it's part of the struggle. It's part of the fun to whittle it down and go, okay, we got the best of the best, and there's stuff there that maybe no one will ever see, and I'll know about it, but in the end, you know, we've whittled it down to 15 minutes that people can enjoy.
Yeah, this one's it's a bittersweet question for me, because kind of like you, when we started the film, or developing the film, it was in 2019, and when we got the green light, it was just when COVID hit, and so overall it did take 4 years. And the story that I originally pitched was in a time when Good Guys as a group, their main thing was holding programming for a number of men. So like you have big groups of people, big events, where they would come together, and one event in particular where they call it 100 Confessions, and that's where they would invite 100 racialized men to go on a retreat where they spend time in nature and have a safe space to say out loud things that they've never said before. And so that was something that was like one of the original hooks that drew me into what they do, and as just like community workers, like what comes along with that process. Of course, the pandemic, you know, limitations on how much people could meet and that kind of thing didn't allow us to film that scene and that event. But it did transform the film and like all of us in a way that none of us were expecting, because it allowed us to then, you know, for me as a filmmaker, I just could only spend time with the group who started the programming. But what unfolded in the times that we did film was this own community group, their own 100 confessions between these 6 men, on how every time they would meet, they became closer and closer. By the end of it, they were like brothers. But what drew them together in the first place was just this common idea for this program that they wanted to do. So for me as a filmmaker, to see over time how their intention for a space like that ended up happening naturally, just because of their passion for this topic, it was a beautiful thing. And so that's why I say it's bittersweet, because I always wanted to get that scene of them, you know, like in the woods, like in community like this, but you know, what we got in the end was still brilliant. So yeah, I think Good Guys now, they're planning on doing an event like that coming up, and revisiting that idea. So maybe a follow-up.
This is an interesting question. There's so many stories. When I thought about making this film, I'm somebody who never wanted children, never talked about it because I couldn't take all the judgment and shaming and pressure around it. But I only knew my own story. So before I started filming, I sent out a survey. I posted it on Facebook like once. It was like, tell me about your experience not having kids. And in the first week, we got 1,900 responses. Yeah, 1,900 responses. And in the second week, we got another 1,900 responses. And it was sort of mind-blowing. This is going back to find your audience. You know, I was like, oh, we have an audience for this film. I think there are enough people who want this to be out there in the world. There were so many stories that people sent in, and you know, we couldn't pursue 3,800 different stories. But I think that the biggest thing is really not one of something we shot, but something in timing. We finished the film in 2021, and then we started distributing it widely in 2022. Right when Roe v. Wade was overturned in the US. And I've been living in the US for quite a while. I moved back to Toronto last year. So a lot of that movie has a sort of an American lens in some ways. So Roe v. Wade was overturned. Abortion became illegal in half of the states of the United States. And suddenly, right as we're releasing this film, all the press we're doing is asking us about this. And I was happy about that, if happy is the right word, because it really allowed us to take this from just like this little niche film about women who don't want kids and them being upset that people are mean to them, and build it out into a much bigger reproductive autonomy story. The idea that everyone, whether they want children or not, should have the right to decide this for themselves. So if we had been working on this film even like a year later, I think we would have had a lot more very powerful stories to tell about all the women who have been forced into carrying out their pregnancies that didn't want to in the last two years now. Is that really? It's been horrendous, but so I wish we could have sort of looked at that. Some of it would have been maybe humorous, but looking at that idea and being able to broaden out into the most profound example of not being able to control your own body and not being able to decide for yourself whether or not you're going to have kids. So, like I said, I'm serious sometimes, and that was the thing I kind of regret that we weren't really able to do, but we did it a lot in press and in Q&As and panels and things like that we had.
That's awesome. All right, I'll pass it over that way. Yeah, for Hidden Heroes, like I was mentioning before, like the stories were so tough to find in general, you know, especially from early era, like military, like World War I, World War II. You know, that I didn't feel like we didn't get to really tell a story because I felt like we had to dig so hard to find the stories. So that wasn't really a big thing for me, but the one story that I guess that I didn't get to tell that stands out to me was when we were doing the research on World War I got really fascinated by the cooks. I was so fascinated by these people who would, like, you know, be in a kitchen right behind the lines, making all this food, you know, with little to no proper cooking equipment, right? Like we're talking World War I, so like fires and pots and, you know, very rudimentary, right? And there was photos of like these male cooks who had like they would dig a hole in the side of a trench and bake bread in there. And there's these amazing photos of these men in the trenches, you know, a cigarette hanging out of the mouth and like a loaf of bread coming out, you know. And I just thought, this is so amazing because first of all, like I was really intrigued by the story because as a woman, I could really relate to being behind the scenes and never feeling recognized for women's work, right? And a lot of what these people were doing was like traditional women's work, right? It was like, you know, cooks. And so I was fascinated by these men, you know, who were cooks. And of course they were always told that, you know, oh, you're a cook because you're not good enough to be at the front line. So yeah, you get back there in the kitchen, you know, meanwhile, cooking food and keeping people fed is the most important thing you can do with an army. It's how a lot of wars are lost, right? It's how the Germans lost, right? Because they didn't have food, right? So I really wanted to tell the story about the cooks in World War I. I was fascinated with it. And I went to Fort York and I interviewed the lead historian at Fort York. And they had a cookbook that they had put out with the recipes that they made in World War I. And I was just like, the amount of people these guys had to cook for, you know, with nothing really, right? I just, as a mom and as a woman who's been in the kitchen my whole life, I'm like, I can't even imagine, you know, the stress of that, right? And the lack of respect too, you know, so I was really, anyway, all of this to say, I was so fascinated and I interviewed Kevin at Fort York and I had the photos and I was like, this is getting in, right? It's getting in the doc, gotta find a story. Could not find a story of a cook from the First World War. I found nothing written. I asked the Canadian War Museum, I asked, you know, because they're in the doc, we have famous authors and historians, Canadian, right? Tim Cook from the Canadian War Museum speaks in the doc. Nobody could give me any leads on stories about cooks, that like memoirs or things that were told. And, you know, a lot of times these guys would actually take the food right into the trenches, right? In the dark of night, right? Walking with huge pots of food into the trenches, like so dangerous. And they would actually be sniped by the Germans because they'd see the heat coming up off the pots as they were walking into the trenches. So the stories are there somewhere, right? But I could not find any. And so that really, really sucked. And I'm hoping maybe Hidden Heroes too. You know, I'm putting it out there, send me messages, hey, my family was a cook. I need a memoir.
Thank you, so interesting to hear that. It makes me think about tree planting and the cooks who do the tree planting, because I've known a couple of women actually who've done that, and it's phenomenal in terms of the amount of food. So yeah, you can really think about what that would mean in terms of feeding an army and providing that, and the dangers as well in those situations. Yeah. I wanted to just ask, like, we've seen as a film festival have seen real changes in terms of what our audience wants, and differences in when we're approaching filmmakers who are to ask to be able to show their films, to screen their films. And we see, you know, we moved to virtual during COVID, and then we continued with the virtual festival following the in-person. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts about having your films shown in person versus virtually, and if you could comment on that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm really excited for both. Obviously, having it shown in front of an audience is very gratifying. You know, being able to see people enjoy it. You know, having people come up to me right after the screenings and want to talk to me, and they get so excited about it, and like, can I get a copy of that for my nephew? You know, he's really interested in military history. Like, people get really excited about it. So that is really great for me when, you know, I get people coming up after to talk about it. You know, the virtual aspect of it, I think more people get to see it, which is awesome, and it's a lot more accessible. So that's really great. You know, but it doesn't give you that same immediate feedback as actually standing in front of an audience or having people be right there able to come and talk to you. So yeah, that's how I say it.
Yeah, you were saying this and I was just like, there's nothing like showing a film in front of a live audience. And there's nothing like talking to your audience after the film. And the sort of visceral in that moment, seeing a film with a whole bunch of people and everyone reacting. I'm getting goosebumps just saying this. Everyone reacting in their own ways. And so I agree, the virtual distribution or virtual film festivals get the film out to a lot more people, which is great. I mean, as I said earlier, our digital premiere went to 35 countries. So that's great. I can't like organize screenings in 35 countries. But yeah, the live thing, it's really great. And the first time we ever showed it to a live audience was at our festival premiere, and I was almost in tears. Finally, like people seeing it, and I could sit there and kind of experience it with them. And I thank them all for coming, because it was still in the middle of COVID, and these people showed up, which was amazing. Anyway, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I totally echo, like, I think as filmmakers, like having that in-person experience and getting to feel the energy of the audience after 3-4 years, however long you're working on a film, it's like, for me, it's like a big reason why I do it in the first place. It's incredibly gratifying. But another piece to the in-person opportunities, I mean, it's screening my short film, Turning Tables, at an event in Toronto is actually where I first met a member of the Good Guys, because it was at an event where a member was asked to do a piece of spoken word following my film. And that was the first time I ever saw a Black man get on stage and talk about his masculinity. And I'm like, but it's a screening for my film, and now I see this. And it was one of those things where I was like, I have to run with this, and the rest is history. And that happened at an in-person screening. And so, you know, it's not just, of course, yeah, it's the synergy of being in the room with the audience, but you never know who you're going to meet as well, and how it's going to relate, and just those conversations are incredible. I do think, though, that hybrid film festivals should be the way forward. I mean, I worked at a film festival during the pandemic called Breakthroughs, which is a festival dedicated to short films by emerging women and non-binary filmmakers. And in that process, we learned a lot about just, virtual festival platforms and making your film accessible, geo-blocking, all that kind of thing. But the feedback that we received, especially from like an emerging filmmaker audience, they're like, this is great for me outside of the pandemic. Like I work 2 jobs, or I'm still in school, I can't always make it out to these things. So having a window where I can screen the film afterwards is really thoughtful. And, of course, from an accessibility standpoint with closed captioning and all these other features, I think that we should be seeing more of that as well, and more integration of that. But yeah, I mean, as a filmmaker, the in-person screenings at a cinema will always be dear to my heart.
Yeah, I think just to maybe only slightly expand on what's already been said, I think one of the things that I love about in-person screenings is how much you learn from them. And I think maybe this is most true, in my case anyway, for a horror film that I did. It wasn't not a documentary, but we showed it before it ever went online. We showed it at the Empire Theater, and we invited everyone we knew, and we kind of got the community around it. And we weren't really sure how it was going to go over. And then opening night, we went toward the theater, and there was a line down the block, and we filled it. And so there were 700 people sitting there about to watch a scary movie, and it's not scary, And so I was more scared than ever, just waiting to go. Will people go like this? And and sometimes they did, and sometimes they didn't. And so the ones they did, you go, okay, so that one got them. Why did that get them? And then the ones they don't, you're like, okay, that didn't work at all. They didn't respond to that at all. I wonder why. How do I fix that for the next time? And you don't get that with an online screening. You just see, okay, 700 people watched it. I hope they liked it, and 40 of them click like, or whatever, who knows. That said, the bulk of our views on that film are online by a long shot. We had viewings at different film festivals around the world, but then the bulk of them are online. So it's kind of like everybody said, you're going to get way more eyes on it by having a hybrid situation or by having it online. But you're going to get the real feedback that you need, whether it's good or bad, from an in-person screening.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah. I don't know if you were asking me or the moderators. I'll allow it.
One thing I wanted to mention, you just reminded me of this. When we were doing virtual screenings, we used to do Zoom panels live. Zoom panels connected to the premiere. So we had live Zoom panels with people from the film, and people could ask questions. And we did a long Q&A after the panel. And I think I've done 6 or 7 of those now. And I mean, that is live. It's kind of nice, and we did get feedback, and we did hear about what people were most interested in, and what was most meaningful, and what people were most curious about live in real time. So that's kind of one way to bring that to virtual screenings. Thanks. Thanks for allowing it.
Thank you all. I just want to see another opportunity for the audience. Any questions from, yeah?
I have a question. It was touched on earlier about how the sort of industry is changing, especially broadcast with all the video on demand and streaming. And I guess you kind of hope that would be a good thing for documentary producers. I didn't get the sense from what you initially said that it was. So I guess I'm kind of asking if you could just comment on where we're going with that sort of delivery with streaming and all that, if that's providing new opportunities, good opportunities, and if not, is there something that fundamentally could change that would give you guys, more money, better opportunity to make what you want to make?
Yeah, I certainly don't have a solution. I would say it's kind of a double-edged sword, and it always is. Like every advancement, put in air quotes, that we make becomes a double-edged sword. So it makes one thing easier and one thing harder. So as our equipment gets more affordable and more accessible, it means more people can make films. But it also means there's a trillion films now. You have to sort through all the ones where, you know, people have no idea what they're doing. They just have a nice camera. And so you say, okay, I got to sort through all that. And then streaming, well, now there's a million different places to put your documentary. But that means that people aren't really willing to pay for them so much because, you know, there's a trillion documentaries out there, and you're not the 1 in 10 that finished a documentary this year. You know, everybody made one this year. And so I don't know that the landscape has changed overall in the sense that, like, oh, documentary filmmaking is going out or it's growing. I think it's filmmaking in general is getting more accessible, but that's good and bad. There's a million more documentaries, but at least people who want to tell them can tell them. And now it's just, how do we make sure that people see them? And I'll let you figure out how to get it.
Yeah, I got the answer.
I'll just bring up the problems.
I mean, I am grateful to streaming platforms because they kind of brought back this documentary renaissance. You know, like there's a lot more interest now in documentaries than there were, because there's a lot of options and things. But it's true, like exactly what you said about the accessibility of it. Like I don't even want to. It's not competition. It's just there's a lot more fish in the sea, I guess you could say. And it's fair for the streamers and the broadcasters to be even more like narrow focused and only take recommendations. And so in that way, there's just more gatekeeping. And that's not always great, because then that means that only certain perspectives of those gatekeepers and what they like is what gets on those streaming platforms. So it really needs to be, I don't know, like we need to just be seeing more diversity in those gatekeepers too. The fact that it's really hard to know who works for Netflix or anything like that, like they keep them under wraps and you'll never know when they attend a screening and things like that. I don't know about that way of doing things. But at the same time, I get that they got to protect themselves and not be bombarded with requests and things. So I certainly don't have the answer. And I mean, all I can say is it's always been hard to make a documentary film and to work in this side of the industry. But I mean, I think the gratification comes from knowing your audience, and that we're seeing a lot more grassroots, you know, bottom up ways of like distributing your film. So yeah.
Yeah, I know there was a point where the streamers, when they had a lot of money to throw around, everybody wanted celebrity documentaries.
Yeah, right.
I mean, sure, we like watching that stuff, you know, but these were celebrity documentaries that were done with the celebrities' participation and blessing, which means, like, what is that? That's just a, you know, big PR, branded content. Now everybody wants true crime. So I have an international distributor who also does the US, and she's been pitching to all the US, you know, networks, and the kind of feedback we get is, oh, I love this film. This is so great. I'm sorry, we're only taking true crime. Or we're only taking a true crime series. Right. And it's like, yeah, okay, I've been here long enough, I get it. But, you know, this is the kind of stuff that we have to sort of deal with. It's very hard to make money. It's really hard. I read like Idiots or something. I don't know. I'm just kidding. No, I just started a new film, like Idiots. Over you.
I don't know if I can tell that. I mean, I think, you know, creating content in Canada has always been hard because
you know, the funding is not really there. Like we have the CBC, which, you know, gets like a minute portion of like what the BBC gets in the UK for original programming. You know, if you want to be a documentary filmmaker in Canada, it's not like there's just a stream that you get into and, you know, you get to meet all the documentary filmmakers and then you get to make your you know what I mean? Like there's no real way in, there's no real industry in Canada, I guess is what I'm saying. So like, you know, even for me with Hidden Heroes, like when I look at the broadcasters that I think I could approach even to just acquire it, right? Just to say, hey, why don't you just pay me 10 grand to acquire it and get it on the broadcaster? There's so few broadcasters that actually pay money to acquire documentaries at this point that it's like incredibly difficult to get it in front. And then even just getting to the gatekeeper who might make the decision, say at History Channel, you know, Chorus, to look at it and tell me one way or another, like good luck getting an email returned. Like you need to know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody to get you in the door. You know, luckily for me, I do have a few people that know some people. So it's a little bit easier to get it in front, but it's always been really, really hard in Canada. And, you know, you compound that just with the fact that documentaries in general, they're expensive to make and, you know, 6 figures plus, you know, I'm sure you can do it for less, but, you know, if you want to do something that is, you know, not, I mean, I guess you want to do something and actually be able to feed yourself while you're, right? Then it would be, you know, so the cost to make it is, you know, it's expensive. So and then the number of theaters in Canada that actually screen Canadian content, I mean, I think it's 1%. Like it's absolutely insane. You know, meanwhile, we have a Canadian government that is locking down what is considered CanCon and what we're allowed to watch in Canada. Like how many times have you know, gone online and, oh, yours is blocked in your country, right? So they're trying to protect our Canadian content industry. Meanwhile, there's no funding and there's nowhere to show it. So like, I don't know what the hell they're doing, to be honest, right? It's backwards, you know? So yeah, I mean, streamers definitely offer that opportunity, but then you end up in the position where like I am, where, okay, well, I've told a Canadian story. This is Canadian history, right? Americans aren't gonna wanna watch this. You know, it's Canadian military history, right? So if you want to make a documentary, then you better look at an international audience because you don't have a market for it in Canada. So what does that mean? Well, that means we can't tell Canadian stories. So it's this vicious circle of garbage in Canada, to be honest. Like, I don't know how else to say it. Like, our industry is so messed up. And the number of people that get funding for documentaries is very small, and you probably know all the names. Like, you know what I mean? It's very, very difficult. So, you know, I think streamers are awesome and the ability to get your film on a streamer is great. I don't know that it's great for Canadian stories, sadly. And yeah, I think it's just gonna be more of the same. Like if you wanna make a documentary, you better self-finance it, put a reverse mortgage on your house and hope you make your money back and, you know, may the force be with you, right? So like I'm looking at distributing this myself over the next year. And the thought of that is hugely daunting. It's like, I run a business already. I have a branded content company, but just the idea of trying to self-distribute this is like, it's a whole other business. So yeah, so I guess I'm pessimistic on that. I know, I'm sorry.
Roz, the Prime Minister.
Can relate to a lot of what you're saying. Funding is really tough. It's very, very tough in Canada to get grants, and it's tough. You know, you see the reductions in the funding after post-COVID, and yeah. So I hear you, and I think, you know, it's from our perspective as putting on a film festival, you really want to be able to provide as much distribution as possible, have the biggest audience possible. And you're trying to survive at the same time to keep being able to present a film festival. And yeah, sort of those big costs of doing virtual as well, but knowing that a lot of your audience may not be ready to come back to in person, or that they've really changed, that a lot of habits have changed, how people watch films. And so, yeah, I think there have been massive changes in the industry as well. Yeah, I just wanted to give another chance if there is anybody who's wanting to ask a question. Yeah.
So I have something more technical, I guess. I know documentaries start out with your pre-production process, but by the time you do your shoot, I know it kind of like there's always room for improvisation. So has there been any stories during the shoot of the documentary where you found something really surprising along the way that maybe just got into the movie as well?
Something that I didn't plan for. I mean, with Hidden Heroes, we had a pretty clear idea. Like, I tend to, go in with a bit of a blueprint. So I kind of have a sense of what I need to get. I guess for me in the process of creating this, the surprises were more so like in the research phase of the project, where I was discovering, for example, the fact that a lot of the logistics people were Indigenous and Chinese Canadian, and finding out these kinds of stories and stories about the women. That was the part to me that was most surprising. I think it depends on the style of doc you're doing. If you're like following a story in the field, then there's more chance for maybe that to happen. For me with a historical doc, I kind of had a sense of what the story was going to be. So there wasn't as much room for like surprises to happen, on set.
Yeah. I think that's such a good question. For me, making a documentary is a process of discovery that continues until my editor says we're done. So, right, yeah. So when we started my so-called selfish life, I knew I wanted to tell people's personal stories, but what happened during the process of filming, it took about 5 years to make this film. In the process, I realized, oh no, it's not just your like rude aunt at Thanksgiving that asks you when you're giving your parents grandchildren. It's actually an entire system that puts pressure on women to have children called pronatalism. And it's like, wait, this is about pronatalism. This is about a global system of it involves capitalism, it involves gender roles, it involves a lot of things. So that was huge because then we incorporate a lot more history, we incorporate a lot more politics. We had a little explainer of what pronatalism is, because it's not a word that is, widely used. So that's the kind of, it like broadened a lot and made it, better film, of course. But that is always the process with me. It's like we're just finding stuff along the way.
I think for me too, it's very similar. And like on your point about the editor, it's so true. We say the film is not finished, only abandoned. And the story of surprise that I have is actually not with this film, but my last short film, Turning Tables, in which I was following the story of an Indigenous DJ who's originally from Thunder Bay and moved to Toronto and was trying to make his way as a powwow techno DJ and music producer. So when we met, he was like really green, like wanting to like just get onto the scene and perform for people. And so we were filming that documentary. And after about 3 months, I was just following him, filming him with my dinky little camera. And then as soon as the film got greenlit, he tells me, he's like, you really inspired me. I booked a one-way ticket to Berlin. I'm gonna go and follow my dreams in Germany. And I'm leaving in October. Are you cool with that? And I'm like, I just got the funding. Like, wait, what? I can't follow you to Germany. And so I had to find a way to like make my whole story about what am I gonna do now? And it ended up working out, as it always does in the end, where we kind of left it as a cliffhanger where he leaves to Germany and you're like, well, what next? Kind of thing. And it's cool and it worked out, but it was not fun at the time. But again, that process of discovery, I mean, it's like that adrenaline rush, it's kind of like that feeling of just, you don't know how it's going to end up. And this other quote that I always try to remember is this, cannot remember who said it, but they said, if the film that you end up with is the same one that you had in mind when you started, it's probably not going to be a good film. And it's this idea that at certain points you will have to surrender, you will have to adapt and go with the flow, and that's the exciting part about it. There's so much growth that happens in that space.
Yeah, I think the biggest one for us was the one I already touched on, was that we started just like, let's make a short about, you know, a bunch of people that would buy a bar and try and run it for a little while and then restore it. And then I think they only had the bar open for 2-3 days. No, it was the first day. It was opening day. COVID hit and everything got shut down. Yes, they didn't even get to open. Like they had all the chairs set up. Everything. The idea was to run it for a year to get used to the idea of owning a bar before they spent a bunch of money, you know, renovating it. And then COVID hit. And I think, to your point with the whole, like if your film looks the way you expected, it's probably not right. I think as you're coming up to surprises in the field, you're basically becoming an audience member. So if you're surprised, well, that's probably a good thing, right? That means the audience is going to be surprised and it's not cookie cutter. So you can kind of embrace them a little bit. And it's easy to say now. At the time, you're like, oh, why does God hate me? You know, like, COVID. And then you're like, okay, actually, maybe I'm not the most affected by COVID with my, you know, documentary about bar owners. But yeah, I think if you're running into these hurdles and these speed bumps, it's probably great for the story as long as you keep going and get over them.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. As we bring this panel to a close, I want to thank each of you so much for your stories and for sharing and coming to share with the audience. And thank you also for being here. And I just want to let you know that the conversation doesn't stop here. So each of these filmmakers are going to be attending the screening of their films this weekend. They're going to be participating in Q&As afterwards. Plus, many other local filmmakers are also going to be here. So please come out, watch the films, come hear some more Q&A. Plus, tonight we're gonna grill them some more. We got questions for you on the green carpet. So we hope to see everyone out to our gala at the Empire Theater. We have a fantastic film, Carlos, about the life of Carlos Santana. And starting at 6 o'clock, we have our green carpet interviews. So we will be interviewing these filmmakers and many more, and those get streamed to the screen at the Empire, so you can watch those live. And I really want to thank again the Quinte Arts Council for funding this. It's an incredible community, lots of support. And thank you to Filmmakers for donating this space for us to use today. And I should mention what happens after Carlos, because right, yes, our gala is not just a film. It will be a live concert performance by Javier Vasquez and his 6-piece band afterwards. It's a Latino-Canadian fusion music. I think it's going to be a really awesome night.
So excited.
Wonderful. Thank you all.
Thank you. Every time I went to the my God, I'm sorry. Like ice cubes.